Undercover boss grabs lunch, freezes when waitress says she can't live on tips anymore. Every system has beautiful numbers to report, but only the founder knows when a number is hiding something wrong. That afternoon wasn't too hot. The air was still, the sky draped in a thin veil of gray clouds like silk, waiting for someone to pull it down. Michael Carter, CEO and founder of the Sunrise Diner restaurant chain, walked into branch number 19 appearing as a regular customer. No signature suit, no escort, just a middle-aged man in a slightly wrinkled shirt, a low baseball cap, and eyes quieter than his footsteps. He ordered a simple lunch, a grilled chicken sandwich, and a black coffee, then sat at a table near the window, where the sunlight touched just enough to go unnoticed. According to the latest report, this branch ranked among the most stable, steady revenue, positive customer reviews, no official complaints. But Michael didn't fully trust numbers. A week earlier, he had received 3 anonymous reports, all echoing the same concerns. Tips aren't transparent. Someone always keeps control of the pose. The person doing the most doesn't get a fair share. On the surface, the place ran smoothly. Staff greeted politely, tables were cleaned thoroughly, the atmosphere was lively but orderly. But Michael knew, if someone has to stay anonymous just to speak up, then what they say is always worth listening to. He sat there, didn't speak, didn't take notes, just sipped the first taste of coffee and began to observe. Because sometimes, the truth isn't in the reports, it's in the small actions never captured by a form. If you also believe these truths deserve to be shared, hit subscribe now, because we still have many untold stories. Sometimes, truth isn't shouted. It just quietly slips out in a sigh, light enough to be ignored, real enough to never be forgotten. Michael was stirring his coffee when the waitress approached. Rachel, according to the small name tag pinned neatly on her left chest, about 25. Bright brown eyes, hair tied low. The way she placed the glass of water down was gentle, as if every movement had been shaped by patient habit. Not rushed, not excessive, not wanting to disturb. "Thank you," Michael said softly, a tone blending courtesy with quiet investigation. "How's the lunch shift treating you?" Rachel paused slightly, not because the question was difficult, but because it touched exactly the spot she had spent all morning learning to stay silent about. She smiled as lightly as people usually saw. But then came an old exhale, part confession, part something she could no longer hold back. "No, I can't survive on tips anymore. Every passing day feels like a countdown." The words slipped out as she turned away, as if they weren't meant for anyone in particular. But to Michael Carter, the man who had written the company's tip policies based on the principle, those who serve more should earn more, it wasn't a complaint. It was living proof. In that moment, the coffee cup in his hand froze midair. The word stable from the reports dissolved in his mind. The clean, rounded numbers suddenly became meaningless. Rachel had no idea that the person who heard her words was the CEO, the founder of the entire system. She was simply speaking from instinct, the kind developed by someone who knew hunger and had begun to doubt her very ability to survive in a place that claimed to follow fair rules. "Endo." Michael set the cup down. He didn't reply. He didn't ask further. He just opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "Countdown means you're already leaving. And I never even knew you were here." There are injustices that don't need to speak up. They just repeat often enough to become routine. And when that routine gets accepted as normal, fairness sinks to the bottom of the system without anyone sounding the alarm. After Rachel's words, Michael didn't leave. On the contrary, he grew even quieter. No more sipping coffee. No more looking at the menu. He just watched everything for a long time. Rachel continued working just like before. Quick service. Remembered orders without writing. Always apologized when food was delayed, even when it wasn't her fault. She moved between tables like an invisible hand, keeping the rhythm of the lunch shift. But Michael noticed something else. Every time a customer handed over their card to pay, Rachel stepped back half a step, not out of politeness, but because she knew she wasn't allowed to touch the POS. The ones who stepped in were always the same 2 male employees, Ryan and Kyle, both neatly dressed, moving with ease, as if the POS was a natural right they didn't have to work hard to earn. They hadn't served that table, but they were the ones who processed the payment, received the thanks, and according to the system, received the entire share of digital tips. Rachel, the one who carried the food, wiped the tables, handled the issues, stood quietly in the background. No complaints, no requests, no words. And it was exactly that silence that shook Michael the most. That afternoon, he returned to the main headquarters. No announcement, no assistant in tow. He went straight into the executive system, logging in with founder-level access, the place where all internal permissions were visible. Branch number 19, POS access. Rachel T. Status, no access. Note, under reassessment for high traffic hour handling capability. Last updated 5 months ago. Suggested by Doug H., branch manager. Michael frowned. He then opened the training records. Rachel had completed the POS handling course 5 months ago. Grade, excellent. Final evaluator, Kyle D., Doug's nephew. He pulled up the tip data from the past 30 days. Rachel T. served 58% of all tables in the branch. POS operations, 0. Digital tips, received, 0%. Kyle D. plus Ryan S. served, 20%. POS operations, 85% of total transactions. Tips received, highest in the branch. Everything was by the book, and everything had signatures. But to Michael, it was a closed loop of privilege and manipulation. He shut the laptop. There was no longer any doubt. It wasn't the system that failed. It was the people who had learned to blindfold the policies using valid procedures. And the most dangerous part, the excluded had gotten used to being excluded. When injustice dresses itself in procedure, it doesn't need to hide. It only needs to repeat itself without anyone questioning it. Michael leaned back in his chair, his eyes no longer focused on the numbers. He was revisiting something he once believed, that a system built transparently would operate fairly on its own, and no one would need to stand guard for it every day. But he had been wrong. He pulled up the POS operation history by time frame. From 11 a.m. to 2 p.m., the branch's peak hours, 92% of POS transactions were handled by Ryan and Kyle. When he filtered the chart by table server, Rachel's name came up repeatedly from table 2 to table 11. No one else had served as many tables as she had. He clicked open the internal access log from the HR system, a section few people ever paid attention to. There, Michael found entries for staff rotation updates. Rachel, proposed transfer to morning shift support, table service only, temporarily suspended from POS operations pending reevaluation. Suggested by Doug H., approved by Kyle D. At the same time, he checked another tab, the monthly internal recognition page. While Rachel's name was nowhere to be seen, Kyle was nominated as Star Staff of the Month for POS closing efficiency beyond target, even though data showed he was not physically present at tables for over 20% of his working hours. Michael paused. A system where the person operating the machine gets praise, while the person doing the real work gets excluded. That's not a system glitch. It's a deliberate distortion. He opened the internal email system, searched the keyword, pause access Rachel. In just 3 months, he found 3 email threads between Doug and the branch support department with eerily identical content. Better not to grant Rachel pause access yet. She performs well, but isn't used to peak hour pressure. It's safer to let Kyle handle it. 3 emails, same language, same tone. No one questioned them. No one asked for proof. And strangest of all, Rachel had never replied. No petition, no complaint, not a single email asking why her access was denied. That silence was the most painful answer of all. She had grown used to not being allowed to ask. Michael rose from his desk. No call to the communications team. No alert to the regional manager. He simply grabbed a small notebook, opened to a fresh blank page, and wrote a single line. The system isn't broken, but someone has learned to use it as a shield to eliminate what's right. Tomorrow, I'm going back. There are days when justice doesn't need to walk through the front door. It only needs one person to stop closing their eyes. Friday morning, 7:48 a.m. Sunrise Diner, Branch 19, opened as usual. The smell of sizzling bacon, buttery waffles, and the steady hum of the coffee machine formed a familiar rhythm. Customers filled the tables. Rachel was clearing table 6, still balancing a tray of coffee though her eyes showed signs of fatigue. Doug, the manager, stood behind the counter checking the morning delivery list. Ryan and Kyle, each with a POS machine in hand, remained the only 2 handling transactions. Until the door swung open. 3 people in Sunrise audit uniforms walked in. Following them, Michael Carter. No disguise, no concealment. Just a man who had decided, today, he would no longer ask. He would speak. Doug looked up first. His face went pale. Mr. Carter, I didn't know there was a schedule. Correct. You didn't know. Because this time, there is no schedule. Michael cut him off. His voice was low, but each word landed with the weight of a verdict long prepared. He gave a signal. One of the auditors opened a laptop and connected it to the screen behind the counter, usually used to display new menu items or inspirational quotes. Now, instead of images, a cold data dashboard appeared. Chart, table service ratio by employee, past 30 days. Rachel T, 57% of total tables. Ryan S, 500. Kyle D, at Sera. Chart, pose, transactions, and recorded digital tips. Rachel T, 0 transactions, 0 tips. Ryan S, 86% of POS operations, highest tips in the branch. Kyle D, 13%, tips tagged with priority distribution. Next came a string of internal emails clearly displayed. Keep Rachel in the server role only. Don't grant POS access, it'll mess up the reports. I'll collect the tips and distribute them at the end of the week. Saves time on arguments. Rachel is capable but quiet. She won't make waves. The entire diner fell silent. Customers paused their meals. A young staff member instinctively pulled their hand away from the POS terminal. Rachel stood frozen behind table 3. Her eyes fixed on the screen, but her face expressionless, as if her heart hadn't yet allowed her to believe what was happening. Michael stepped forward. No microphone needed, only the silence that was already there. We built this system so that those who do the most are recognized the most. But here, someone has turned the POS into a personal asset. Someone used administrative language to erase a person from the spreadsheet of fairness. And he looked toward Doug, whose face no longer held the usual confidence. Doug, you didn't correct a process. You rewrote the definition of power and handed it to whoever you favored. Ryan, Kyle, you used the system as if it were a reward, not a responsibility. But the tips you received weren't yours. He gave a signal. 3 envelopes were handed out. Immediate termination notices. No debate, no defense, just silence and the stunned faces of all 3. Michael turned to address the entire staff and customers. Starting today, Sunrise will operate by its original promise. Whoever serves gets recognized. Every POS operation will be displayed in real time. No more pending evaluations. No more being pushed aside for not speaking up. And no one will be forced to walk away just because they did the right thing in silence for too long. His gaze landed on Rachel. She was still standing, but had lowered her tray. Not to surrender, but to breathe. Michael approached no longer as the CEO, but as someone who owed her a sentence that had come far too late. Thank you for staying, even when no one saw you. And 3, because sometimes courage doesn't lie in speaking up, but in simply not walking away. Rachel said nothing, but in that moment, for the first time, her eyes did not look away. She met Michael's gaze, like a silent act of reclaiming her identity. She didn't bow. She didn't smile. She simply stood there with a silence that was no longer surrender. Michael continued, "Did you know that Rachel once completed the POS training course with an excellent grade?" A few employees murmured. Some turned to look at her, as if for the very first time, they were truly seeing her presence amid the everyday routine. He paused in front of the screen, which was still displaying the data, and for the past 30 days, she served more than half the tables in this diner. But the system has recorded her as if she doesn't exist. The final line that appeared, Rachel T, 0 tips, 0 transactions, cut cleanly into the pride of everyone in the room. At that moment, a woman near the front door placed her hand on her coffee cup, then looked up. She was the one who served me on Monday, wasn't she? Michael didn't answer. He simply nodded, and that was enough. A silent domino effect rippled across the diner. Another customer set down their fork as a quiet gesture of respect for the person who had just served them lunch, nameless, unrecorded, without access. Michael turned back to the auditors. Reset the POS system. Right here, right now. A new POS device was placed on the counter, plugged directly into the internal network. For the first time in months, the real-time interface appeared, an automatic tip-sharing board by transaction, transparently assigning access levels, and the very first name to appear was Rachel T. Applause broke out, not thunderous, not synchronized, just scattered claps, but genuine. Michael looked at Rachel. You weren't seen today because you spoke up. You were seen because finally the system learned to open its eyes. Rachel nodded but didn't cry, didn't tremble. She simply walked to the counter, picked up her new POS card, and plugged it into the machine, as if she had done it 100 times before. Only this time, it was the first time she was allowed to. Michael stepped back, and like a sudden slow beat in an otherwise too fast song, he added, "This diner was never lacking in talent. It just lacked people willing to look a little closer." No one in the room laughed, But everyone heard something had changed, not in the words themselves, but in what no longer needed to be said. It was in the way Rachel began to walk, shoulders straighter, steps unyielding, and the entire space began shifting to her rhythm. And fairness doesn't begin with rules written in capital letters. It begins when someone finally stops to really see the person who's always been there. 1 month passed. Sunrise Diner, Branch 19, opened as usual. But the atmosphere was no longer the same. No more tense silence after every shift assignment. No more side glances when the POS device changed hands. Instead, there were clear callouts for orders, confident footsteps, and something new, right at the counter, real-time tip sharing board. Every transaction, every time a card was swiped, the name of the actual server lit up. No one left out, no one hidden in the background. In the bottom corner, a small line engraved directly into the wood read, "Every contribution leaves a trace. Everyone who truly serves deserves to be seen." At the window-side table, the familiar spot where everything once began, Michael Carter sat alone. No disguise, no notebook, just a returning guest, to a place where once he had looked away. Footsteps approached. Rachel, now in a dark blue trim manager's uniform, came forward, carrying a cup of hot black coffee. Her hair was neatly tied back. Her new name tag pinned at her chest, Rachel T., Assistant Manager. She placed the cup down, then stood tall. No hesitation, no shrinking back. Just a person, finally called by her rightful name. "This morning," she said softly, "is no longer a morning I survive off tips. I just needed a chance. Thank you for seeing it." Michael didn't answer. He simply raised the coffee to his lips, the scent still familiar, the taste still bold. But this time, the coffee wasn't just poured by an employee. It was poured by a system that had relearned how to treat people fairly. A few new staff glanced up at the screen, seeing their names appear next to the tip amount from Table 5. They nodded to each other, no words needed. Because from now on, they knew. Every effort leaves behind a glow. No one has to strain just to exist in invisibility. Rachel turned away, beginning a new shift. No longer someone standing behind the system, but someone now holding it steady so it wouldn't drift off course again. Michael sat still, quietly taking a small sip. The coffee was still the same type, but the aftertaste had changed. It was trust, the belief that fairness doesn't come from policies. It comes when those who deserve to be seen are finally no longer hidden. Under the soft sunlight filtering through the window glass, Michael looked around. The usual bowed postures of the staff were gone. Each person was working, but with something more than just duty. The awareness that they were trusted. At the far end of the counter, a new employee named Ben was awkwardly handling a tray of drinks. He had just placed the second cup when a customer at table 2 pulled out their card. For a moment, Ben hesitated, glancing over at Maya, Rachel's former teammate, now leading the new shift crew. Maya gave a subtle nod. Ben stepped toward the counter, picked up the POS, his first time operating it directly. The screen lit up. The message appeared. Order 3 Ben L. 3,000 confirmed. As that line showed up on the digital board, no one clapped. They just looked and nodded, as if to say, this is how it should be. Michael watched it all, said nothing. But inside, he understood. What he was witnessing wasn't just the result of a reform. It was the moment a system had learned how to trust again and entrust the right people. To the right of the counter, a small new sign had been hung a few days ago, proposed by Rachel and unanimously agreed upon by the team. The words were carved plainly, no flair, but they carried the weight of a quiet oath in this newly restored rhythm. Here, those who serve are named. Those who remain silent are not forgotten. Michael took another sip of his coffee. This time, not to stay alert, but to remember it. The right flavor, from the right hands, at the right moment. A flavor that wasn't just of the drink, but of trust, rebuilt. Rachel walked by again, but didn't stop. She was coordinating online orders, labeling for express delivery, adjusting the name tag of a new hire. Every motion swift yet full of care. Michael set his cup down, and in that moment, he realized. The woman who once said, "I can't survive on tips anymore," was now living not because she received tips, but because she was entrusted with responsibility. The diner was still noisy, the kitchen was still hot, but the sense of peace didn't lie in that noise. It lay in the transparency of the operation, where everyone clearly understood why they were there. And that is the deepest kind of restoration a founder could ever witness. Not because he stepped in to fix things, but because he chose to truly see and didn't look away. No one should have to survive in a system by hiding. Fairness isn't built by laws, but by the courage to look directly at those who deserve it. And a system is only truly alive when it's quiet enough to hear even the voices that were never spoken.